What is up, lads? You're with Budget Monk, and welcome to a new video. I wanted to talk about what I believe is a misconception, and that is that cavalry is bad. I think it gets a bad rap. Now, to be fair, this isn't as popular as it used to be with the changes or buffs to aristocratic ideas and the addition of horde ideas and those sorts of things. I don't hear people talking as much about how cavalry is bad, but the internet being the typical way that it is, I have been ridiculed in the past for actually using cavalry, period, as though it is somehow like it's objectively worse than infantry. Well, in fact, cavalry has always been objectively better than infantry, objectively speaking, as it has the ability to flank, which infantry doesn't. And even if you discount that because people criticize that it's not flanking that often when you might want it to, it actually has better stats than infantry. So infantry has 0.5 shock in the beginning of the game. Cavalry has 1 shock, as you can see, which is 100% better. Infantry does have access to a little bit of fire damage here, as you can see, but to keep it simple, fire isn't that valuable in the beginning of the game, and even if you added them together, the cavalry still has more. Now, the real criticism to cavalry is, in fact, the price point. That has always been the criticism, is that if this costs 10 ducats, so this is 25, then that's 100%, and this is 250%. It is, you could run 2.5 infantry for the price of 1 cavalry. That has always been the criticism, just to be clear. But before we get into that a little bit, I just wanted to talk about that. When I'm comparing infantry to cavalry, I'm talking about, in this stack case, using 9 infantry to 7.2, like the game gives you, or 7 and 2. Or even 9 versus 6 and 3. If you had the same morale, the same discipline, the same tactics, the same roles, the cavalry would win every single time because it's objectively better. So just to be clear, I'm not talking about stacking cavalry like it's the main backbone of your army. I don't agree with that. And therefore, if you are using cavalry, you don't even know what's going on, or you agree with me, do be aware that cavalry is actually going to get worse as the game goes later on. If, for example, you start stacking infantry modifiers from policies and national ideas and those sorts of things, your cavalry is not going to have the same kind of value provided, so just be aware of that. And if you stack cavalry modifiers, well, it doesn't affect your entire army. So I'm more talking about the beginning of the game, just be aware of that. Now, let's talk about the money. There seems to be some kind of absent-mindedness of the entire community at large. This is so much more expensive. That's the real criticism. Well, look at our money here in the beginning of the game is hungry. If we turn our maintenance down, this is typically what you're going to be doing while you're at peace. You can see that, of course, because we're not maintaining our units, our money comes up. But there's another option that people often will do when they're at peace, and that's drill their army. Well, notice if I drill 1 stack and turn my maintenance down, we're kind of half and half, and that's because, if you don't know, you pay for drilling units. So right now the maintenance is low on this stack, we're paying for this one. And it's a very common tactic. What people do as a compromise, they kind of don't want to pay for the units, but they do want to drill. What they typically do is they disattach cannons because they're quite expensive, and they drill the infantry with their maintenance down. That way you're not paying the army maintenance for your cannons. Well, of course, if cavalry is extremely expensive, you should be using this treatment, but a lot of people don't use cavalry whatsoever, so they don't consider that. But of course, that is a way to really reduce the price point issue with cavalry, as you're only really paying for it for the most part during warfare. And let's talk about other things. Considering it is stronger but so extremely expensive, is there ever a scenario where you might actually want to pay for it? Of course there is. It's when you're extremely rich. So I can see that happening as a nation, for example, like Venice. Venice is not Eastern technology or anything, but Venice, despite being a strong nation, let's be honest, and being extremely affluent, that's the key in the equation, they're much weaker in terms of force limit to many of their sort of rivals that are nearby, and they don't access any army bonuses if you look at their ideas throughout the course of the game. They don't have any strengths to morale or anything. So what are you supposed to do? Well, one thing I would really recommend doing is using cavalry, wielding that money, despite the fact that it's so much more expensive, utilizing it to your advantage. Now, a lot of people delete their cavalry right on the onset of the game. I have seen it, and then they will immediately go to war afterwards, which, I mean, it makes me cringe, guys. Like, in the beginning of the game, you don't have manpower. people are replacing it and going down to zero manpower, or hiring mercenaries where the mercenaries are very expensive and they're spending a similar amount of money. What I would recommend doing if you're going to go straight to war is use the cavalry that you start with. At least you don't need to recruit more, and then you can consolidate it if it takes damage, or get rid of it entirely after the war if you like. But I would very much recommend not deleting your cavalry right in the beginning of the game if you're going to go to war. Let's talk about a little bit of a principle that some people might not understand, and that is the more decisive you are in your battles, the less money you're going to pay for reinforcement cost, and the less manpower it's going to cost you. Now, I don't want to pretend like cavalry is actually going to be less expensive than infantry. No, it's not, but you'll be surprised. I have 11,000 hours played in this game, guys, and I did an ultra massive late game campaign once using quantity, because everybody used to be using quantity before the nerf to it. And I would always use offensive. I always thought offensive was better because of the siege ability primarily, but other reasons, which I won't try to digress going into. But people kind of really told me I should be using quantity, and I tried it out, and I was really, really surprised, guys, that, every single one of my generals with offensive is better. And then you have 5 discipline, which is big in the late game. And you have to understand that if you're taking battles and battles and battles, as a very good player who's good at the game, trying to achieve results, you're typically only taking decisive battles no matter what. But every single one of those battles is going to be that much more decisive when you have offensive versus quantity, for example, because of the pips and the discipline. And this is going to save you a lot of manpower and reinforcement costs to your units throughout the course of the game. Same thing applies to cavalry. You'll be surprised that if you're paying that price point, it's also going to save you some money, though. That's something to be aware of. You do get some value out of it by, not having to reinforce the units as much. So with that being said, let's talk about the Cossack estate. One of my favorite nations, of course, is Hungary, and we start with 20% cavalry combat ability, amazing. But also Byzantium is one of my favorite nations, and these are both Eastern. If you get the Cossack estate, it is, when you access Steppe, you get the Cossack estate, and its bonuses, just like this. It's very easy to get bonuses nowadays. They give you combat ability and cost reduction. Remember, cost is the issue with cavalry. So, the nobility does not improve the quality of the infantry. So it's worth saying is that you can improve the quality of the cavalry. When I bring that up, I've always brought that up. People say that's not the point because you're stacking modifiers. Well, speaking of modifiers, there are plenty of other nations. I find Bavaria, when you play them, you're quite limited by aggressive expansion, but they have a lot of farmlands, trade centers, that sort of thing, and you get very tall provinces and you're very affluent. They have combat ability. Teutonic Order has combat ability. A lot of the stuff might not be utilized as much as it could be, and give it a go and just be aware of that. So hopefully those are some tips that benefit you, like stop drilling your cavalry. Try to use some cavalry, at least don't delete it in the beginning of the game. Try it out, and aristocratic is a pretty good idea overall, guys, with decent amount of manpower, which is hard to access. General cost, I love diplomats personally. It's pretty much inevitable that you use mercenaries nowadays. Siege pip, really nice. I think equilibrium bonuses are good because it means less things that you feel obligated to take care to keep your loyalty up, which means less influence, which means you gain more crown land when expanding. And it's a great idea in my opinion. This is great for the economy. Naval tradition and army tradition is good in general. So either way, I hope you appreciated this video. I'm going to make more misconception videos in the future. Thank you very much for watching. Appreciate you guys. I'll see you next time.